Alex.
And I'm Eddie.
Welcome to the third episode of Catch 52, a politics broadcast brought to you by WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
We are now 49 weeks away from Inauguration Day, and we have just concluded the first primary second of the primary season in New Hampshire.
Yeah, it's new. Now that New Hampshire is over, finally we actually have a primary that works. Imagine that.
Yeah, it actually reported on time. We had a winner declared before midnight. It was actually a good time. I got my full 8 hours of sleep.
Yeah. Thanks, Iowa.
But the results we got out of it are a little close, to say the least. I believe.
Yeah. So, oh my God! All right, there's so much freaking news to talk about. It's absolutely insane. So we're going to talk today about some of the. We're going to focus on New Hampshire, of course, and then we are also going to be getting into some of the other news and some of the other headlines that have come on this week. Because, goodness gracious, there have been a lot.
There's a lot of stuff to talk about.
So, all right, let's get right into this here.
So,
New Hampshire.
Well, right now, Bernie won New Hampshire by 1.3% of the vote.
Hey, Eddie, do you think that was a victory for Bernie?
Well, it was less than he won the popular vote by Iowa from. So it was a victory, but it's, very close. And considering he swept the floor against Hillary, kind of, in 2016, it's not as much of a victory.
Yeah, look, I think everybody expected Bernie to win, and it's really important to take into account the idea of narratives, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you win in a primary? Well, it's not as easy as, actually getting the most votes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only do you have to get the most votes, but you actually have to, win in a way that people expect you to win.
Not only that, you also have to win delegates. And in terms of the delegate race, Pete Buttigieg is currently winning the Democratic nomination with a whole 22 votes out of the total 3,979 votes. Bernie is in a close trailing just right behind at 21. So it's currently a one delegate race, and we still have just about 4,000 more delegates to be determined. So we are very early on in the race. We've had two very small, very white states vote, and now we have the rest of the country coming up. The rest of the country, especially being Nevada and South Carolina coming up, which are two much more heavily minority states.
Yeah. And I think the thing to keep in mind with Nevada and South Carolina is that we're going to see a very different story that is told through the polls.
Yeah.
So far, we've seen a story of voters who are concerned with primarily beating Trump and primarily beating Trump and primarily healthcare.
Yeah.
And then we're going to see, I think in Nevada, you're going to see a lot of voters who are very concerned with immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in South Carolina, I don't know what voters are concerned with in South Carolina. I think you might see a lot of criminal justice stuff in South Carolina. I think you might see maybe some immigration, but again, it's not as if the Democrats are going to win South Carolina ever again. Who knows? But it's so difficult to tell what such a small amount of Democrats is going to think.
Yeah, the thing is with states like that is it is a good representation of how maybe minority votes feel, but it's also not a great representation of how the state as a whole feels,
right? Since
it is such a smaller percentage of the state voting because there's so many fewer Democrats in South Carolina than there are North Carolina, or than there are Republicans there.
Yeah, North Carolina actually, you could reasonably say that North Carolina, the Democrats have a chance to flip North Carolina.
Yeah. Another interesting thing to look at in New Hampshire is, the race right now it looks like it's starting to heat up as Bernie and Buttigieg as the front runners. But if you look at South Carolina, the people getting the top two votes are Tom Steyer and Joe Biden. So that
how did Tom Steyer do that? That's what I want to know.
Tom Steyer has been going on a very aggressive advertising campaign, especially in South Carolina. I think in Nevada too. trying to win over minority voters and trying to win those not early, like not first states, but those secondary states, and get momentum there moving into Super Tuesday. I can't speak for him definitely, but if I were him, I'd guess that's his strategy.
Seems to be the billionaire play to really hope that you get most of your momentum from Super Tuesday. But I will say Steyer's polling in South Carolina in particular has been quite impressive. I mean, we have a similar story as we did going into New Hampshire in South Carolina. So in going into New Hampshire, it was not a question of will Bernie win, it was a question of how much Bernie will win by, and that will determine the narrative. Mm-hmm. So Bernie only winning by 1.5% is effectively a win for Pete, and honestly the big winner of the night, Klobuchar, as opposed to South Carolina. Sure, Biden might be at 31% right now, but Steyer getting 18% is ridiculous.
Keep in mind also this most recent poll of Biden with 37% was February 2nd, which was before the Iowa caucuses. So there's a lot that's happened since this most recent primary, since this most recent poll. So we don't know. We're almost 2 weeks removed since the most recent poll. So South Carolina right now could be anything. I mean, if you look at national polls right now, if you're just trying to inference from there, in the past, since that date, February 2nd, where Biden was at a 27% in the polls averaging, he's now at 19%. So he's fallen 8% there. An 8% fall elsewhere could mean the same thing, especially if he falls that amount in South Carolina. And as you've seen in the past, if we've been monitoring polls, Alex and I, and what we've seen is a strong but wavering support from African American voters of Joe Biden.
Yes, the thing to note about those voters of Joe Biden is that they've been ridiculously inconsistent. So there was a poll, for example, we might have brought this up before, that during 1-2 week period.
Yeah, it was economist polls. Yeah, I was only looking at economist polls, so it was similar polling data, everything like that.
But I think it tells like a really interesting story. So this is right when there were a few people that dropped out. I think maybe this is like when Cory Booker dropped out, something like that. And what we found is that, what was it? It was Biden lost about 8 points quite randomly, and they didn't go anywhere. And so we looked into it. Turns out an overall 8-point loss for Biden was actually about a 17-point loss for him in African Americans.
Yeah.
And then when we tried to see where that support had gone, it didn't go toward any particular candidate.
No, it went from they asked. So the nice thing about economist polls is they ask about like 400 questions. Their report, I guess 200 questions. Their reports are 400 pages, 2 pages per question. They break it down by race, party, ideology, income.
Yeah, it's really convenient actually.
It's very cool to see. Economist polls are something we're going to have to talk about separately because their poll results are consistent within their own polls, but compared to the rest, not necessarily consistent. So, what you see in an economist poll released the same day as, an ABC poll or a Monmouth poll will show completely different numbers. I mean, right here, Monmouth poll released on the 9th shows Biden with 26%. Economist 2 days later shows Biden at 22%. So that could be him
right.
falling. That could be something completely different. I don't know. So we're going to have to do the Economist polls are their own separate thing. But what happened was for the Economist released within a span of 4 polls, Biden went from about, I think, like 72% very favorable among black voters to 50% very favorable, and then back up. And it was
really weird.
It was over 2 polls, so it was very unlikely just an error because it happened twice. And Economist tends to poll a good couple of thousand people.
So pretty large sample size. I think that you can take away some positive results from that. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I think is key to take note of in an economist poll is the fact that it doesn't line up anywhere else with any other polls.
No, it doesn't at all. And I can't speak to whether or not that's more or less accurate. We need to look at 2016 polls and where that was, but it's definitely something interesting when you're looking at economist polls to remember that they don't necessarily line up with the rest of the polling data.
Always better to look at that RCP polling average, which is what we try to do here on Case 52.
Yeah.
Now, all right, so we talked about Biden in South Carolina.
Let's move back to New Hampshire. Yeah.
Let's move back to New Hampshire because there's more to talk about in New Hampshire. So Bernie wins 26%. Pete is in a ridiculously close second with 24.5%. How about Amy Klobuchar?
And Klobuchar was rising like crazy after she had
a debate performance for the ages.
Yeah,
I think
everyone voted her. Like basically every single news site voted her as at least one of the winners, if not the only. I think New York Times put her and Warren as winners, but what else can you expect from New York Times? And with that great debate performance, the question is she a viable candidate? Because for a long time, everyone was kind of viewing her with the same seriousness as like a Tulsi Gabbard or a Julian Castro candidate, where it's like, yeah, sure, they'd be great, but they can't break through. And this could have been her breakthrough. A lot of people were expecting it to come in Iowa. It didn't. It came a week later in New Hampshire. And I don't know. The other question is,
how well does she? I mean, Klobuchar is a candidate. She has to keep this momentum going.
Yes,
I think that's the number one thing. And so for her to keep this momentum going, she has to do well in Nevada for Klobuchar standards, and she has to do well in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And in South Carolina, she's been polling abysmally.
So if you look at New Hampshire, Klobuchar came within 6 points of Bernie. And if you add up her totals with Pete's totals, they're at 45%, just over, compared to Bernie and Warren, who are at 35.5%. So that's a 10% difference between the moderates polling together and the progressives.
I will push back on that just a little bit, because I think there's a lot of progressives that look at Pete and go, "That's my guy."
That's true, but not to the extent that I think not to the extent that it's that big.
Do you think that Pete is a candidate who makes Bernie bros susceptible to him?
I don't know. So Pete is probably the least liked candidate on Twitter, where Bernie bros are very active.
Okay, that's pretty fair.
The Pete Twitter, or the Bernie Twitter right now in the past few weeks, has been crazy, like maybe hitting 2016 levels of crazy, especially with what happened in Iowa was crazy. With they were alleging a whole Democratic conspiracy, a second presidential election in a row, which I don't think
they also did what Bernie wanted them to do.
What do you mean?
When they changed the rules.
Yeah. So what happened was, after 2016, Bernie almost definitely won the popular vote by a large margin, but lost just like he did this time around. So he pushed the Iowa Democratic Party super, super, super hard to make sure that the popular vote was released, which led to part of these problems.
Which, I mean, at face value, releasing the popular vote's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody does it for the general, so how hard should it be to do it for a primary?
No. The problem is when you use an app. But we talked about that last week. So the Bernie Bros. So the Bernie Bros are like basically Bernie or bust people that all in for Bernie Sanders. If Bernie Sanders isn't our president, America's doomed. We're going down a slide that's going to end up bringing America straight down the toilet. Like,
there's a subsection of Bernie Bros that I think also fall into Trump voters, but that's a very small percentage as opposed to what some other people say.
There's not many Bernie Bros left that are Trump supporters, in my opinion. Yeah. I think they all moved in 2016.
That makes sense, especially, and if you were a hard Bernie Bro, it sort of galvanized you politically.
Yeah.
And then once you are, I hate to use this word, but once you're woke, especially if you exist on Twitter, like a lot of the Bernie Bros do, then you're sort of, you just start to exist in that space.
Yeah, and so when a candidate who is supporting more moderate plans starts to do well, you get a very aggressive anti-that person reaction.
Right.
Especially in Pete's case, where it was such a close victory and he declared that he was leaving victorious. And all that stuff, the Pete the Cheat trending on Twitter, Mayor Cheat trending on Twitter.
All this stuff.
All that stuff. And, is that actually the case, or is it just them perceiving that way, as Twitter tends to do?
That's true. Now, while we're talking about victory speeches, there is a key difference between the victory speeches in New Hampshire and the victory speeches in Iowa.
Absolutely.
For some reason, and I have my suspicions about this, every single candidate called out the other frontrunners by name.
Yep.
Every single one of them did. Even Joe Biden, Pete, now that he's not a frontrunner.
Pete said, "Nice job, Bernie." Klobuchar said, "Nice job, Bernie and Pete." So did Warren. So did Biden.
Old Tom Perez sent out a memo saying, "Hey guys, this camp business can't stand."
That's almost definite, but not completely positive. And on the subject of camp business, actually, that's a question as to whether or not camps, not only are they beneficial, but are they actually toxic now for the candidates and for the party?
I mean,
Because
they have their place. They have their place.
But right now, I don't think...
I feel like that place is Facebook.
I don't think Bernie is going to win in any or without a contested primary unless Warren drops out, vice versa. Same thing with Pete and Amy. The same thing with like Biden, Steyer, Bloomberg, all the.
But
old
that's the
money
thing.
people.
Do you think Warren would take the L for Bernie? Because like until recently, I'm not sure, but I think she would right now.
I don't know, because the thing is, which candidate would a person running for president only runs for president because they think they're the best person for the job.
It takes an excessive amount of hubris to run for president.
Absolutely. So if you think you're the best person for the job, why would you drop out for someone else to do it? Which, I mean...
That's a very philosophical Pete or Yang kind of perspective.
the other interesting thing about that, though, is Bernie did wait for Warren to run in 2016,
That's
and when she
very
did,
true.
he did. So I don't know. But, you know,
Is party unity good in the general? I would say yes.
Yes, but the whole point of a primary is to have party disunity in a sense, to figure out who's the best.
Yeah, but
Now,
I mean,
obviously not in party fighting, but to have disunity and to see which candidate best represents the most amount of people, or the most diverse spread of the party. Or
maybe
however you
don't
wanna
depose
frame
your
it.
party chairman during your presidential convention.
Yeah, calls.
Sorry, Debbie Wasserman Souls, but it's true. I mean, sure,
Yeah.
well, the Russian hack, they got hacked by the KGB. Poor luck. I don't know whatever you want to call that. It was a really bad situation. But, I mean, at the end of the day, those emails existed.
Yeah.
And it's still not a good... It's not a good look. It will never be a good look. I mean, you've got Donna Brazile, who's basically... I think she's a paid Fox News contributor at this point. So as far as people who have run this convention, not a great track record in the past few times.
No.
So we're hoping... I mean, Tom Perez made me nervous when he was appointed or elected. I can't remember which.
Elected.
When he was elected by the party to be their chairman, he made me nervous because he definitely came from the more fiery progressive side of the party, but he seems to have proved himself to be a bit of a steady hand.
Not
in all of this.
necessarily, though, because that election happened right after the whole Bernie Clinton dispute had started to resolve, before the whole controversy of it came back up.
But that was that was the first internal vote of the party when it was the first vote when the party had to look at itself and say, how can we reconcile our differences?
Yeah, but the Tom Perez was not running on behalf of the progressive wing. That was Keith Ellison. Bernie endorsed Keith Ellison. Perez was endorsed by like Hillary. So it was another internal party dispute that ended up winning. Okay, we're having some audio issues, so we're going to cut off, and we're going to come back in just a second. All right, and we're back. Sorry about that. So as we were saying, we were talking about the DNC chair elections back in 2016. So
if you're just joining us, this is WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
So Tom Perez was running on the more moderate side of the wing that's let's unify the party to fight Trump. Keith Ellison was running more on the we need to get these policies passed, and I'm the one to represent these policies.
Yep.
So Perez ended up barely winning. I think it was a multi-ballot vote.
Yes,
And
I remember reading that it was 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
I was very pro Keith Ellison at that time.
I was too, yeah. Both of us were Bernie bros in 2016, and then.
But here's the thing, though. What's the difference between the 2020 Bernie bro and what's the difference in the 2016 Bernie bro? Because you can take a ton of the progressive coalition that is hyperactive in the party right now, and you can mush it together, all that energy in one place. That was the Bernie bro coalition, and we fall into that category because we are, younger Caucasian males.
And the other interesting thing about the Bernie Bro Coalition in 2016 is a lot of, if you look at pictures from Bernie running in 2016, he had these huge crowds that they looked like Trump rallies. I mean,
they kind of were, though.
They were. And the reason is both Bernie and Trump were huge populists and attracted pretty much the same base. It was disaffected voters who wanted a big change. Obviously there are slightly different parts of that camp, but the Bernie idea, like the Bernie message and the Trump message, resonated a lot with a lot of the same people. And that's not the case now because Trump has so heavily consolidated his support, where it's now 90+% approval constantly within his party.
Well, now that he's doing all these, I mean, he's had the chance to do a couple of bills that have been basically conservative. You can call them conservative handouts. They weren't even passed. I mean, the omnibus bill was very, very traditional politician, but that's because it was pork barrel after pork barrel after pork barrel. Everybody is going to get funding. Everybody's going to get something that they can bring back to their constituency. That's fundamentally not a very conservative thing. I mean, it ends up being, but let's talk ideologies for a second. The Republican Party has, at least in theory, been the party of debt hawks. So, not increasing spending unless it's absolutely necessary, unless it's the Defense Department, but, forget about that.
And now the only debt hawk left is Rand Paul.
Exactly, and plenty of conservative commentators. I mean, the guy who runs I believe it's like Americans for Tax Freedom or Americans for Responsibility and Taxation. The head lobbyist for that organization said that the current. So now I'm sort of talking about there was a recent the most recent budget proposal put forth by the Trump White House, and this was the quote that the head of this very, very conservative tax lobbying group had to say. He said that this budget proposal was aspirational, but unachievable because it cut Medicaid by. It was something ridiculous. I mean, it was cutting Medicaid. That's not something that Trump supporters want.
No.
And it was increasing the defense budget while it was cutting $4 trillion in spending over 10 years, if I have that right.
That sounds right, yeah.
Maybe not over 10 years, but over some period of time, it cut $4 trillion in spending, which is insanity. No, that's never going to get passed.
So there's that, but circling again back to New Hampshire, you have the big question of Bernie's been able to squeak out, and now he's currently leading the polled popular vote by 2.7%, and Pete is winning the delegate race by 1 delegate. So
Pete's winning. Technically.
Kind of, but also are either of them winning. And what we'll see now coming to these next two primaries and then also coming into Super Tuesday is where is the moderate support and where's the minority support and where is
How
the
ridiculous would
support.
it be if the minority support went to, someone's obviously going to go to Biden,
Mm-hmm.
but let's say it goes, because I'm going to go off the fact that Klobuchar is polling 5% in South Carolina. How ridiculous would it be if the minority support goes to Biden, Bloomberg, and Steyer?
It would not be crazy, actually.
The whitest, richest guys.
It wouldn't be crazy for it to go to Bernie. If you look at the most recent Economist poll, and remember what we said about Economist polls, Bernie has over a 50% favorability with African Americans and a 43% favorability among Hispanics. Compare that to Pete's 34% favorability among African Americans and 35% among Hispanics. So there is a much bigger difference.
Yeah. And I am predisposed not to like billionaires buying their way into races. I think there's a lot of people that can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
It may just be the fact that I haven't lived through enough elections. It may just be the fact that I don't understand where these communities are coming from. But the idea...
And it also may just be the fact that both of us were actively supporting a candidate that wanted to raise taxes on the billionaires back in 2016.
Sure.
So,
just the idea that minority communities in large numbers would come out in support of the richest, whitest guys breaks my brain.
It's a little hard to wrap your mind around. And also,
this is definitely something that we need to have an interview for.
It's not just minorities, though, is the thing. Bloomberg has catapulted into third place.
Despite the fact that Twitter also hates Bloomberg. Hashtag racist Mike Bloomberg was trending on Twitter.
Yeah, but I'll put this again. Mike Bloomberg is in third place. First place is Sanders. Second place is Biden. Third place is Michael Bloomberg. Pete's currently in fifth, but also is winning. So that's the state of affairs we're in right now, where you can be in fifth place and also be in first, but also be in second.
You know who we haven't said who is supposed to win this race?
Who?
Where's Joe Biden in all of this?
Yeah, so Joe Biden's support has been crumbling recently.
It's kind of hard to watch, but if you don't like Joe Biden, it's really easy to watch.
So if you look at those most recent polls, as I pulled them up, Biden in the 5 most recent polls is polling at 18, 23, 16, 17, and 22. So that one exception, or no, there's the 23 and the 22, but there's also the 18, 17, 16. So his support is in the high teens, low 20s. If you look at just a month ago, he was polling high 20s, low 30s. So that is huge. And after Iowa and New Hampshire, he is just falling. I think a lot of the support for Biden was assuming that he would be the most, quote unquote, electable candidate.
Guys, Biden is the one, beyond all these Democrats, that's going to beat Trump. That was the idea.
And also attract moderates. And then you have 2 very moderate, very white states come out, and he completely underperformed.
Just
there.
Destroyed. I mean, you take Iowa, 4th place. 5th place in New Hampshire?
Yep, 5th place in New Hampshire.
Oh, boy.
Fun fact, Biden has never finished above 4th place in any primary that he's run in his 3 presidential campaigns.
Imagine.
He's run 3 presidential campaigns and has never won, never made the podium. So,
I don't mean to hate on Joe Biden. He's not a bad guy.
The thing is, like, maybe he'll actually, not end up in 4th place in South Carolina and Nevada, but maybe he's going to keep falling in support. We don't know.
If Biden doesn't win in South Carolina, and I mean just outright, if Biden doesn't win, he's going to drop out. He has to.
I mean, he doesn't have, South Carolina has been his hope. So his strategy in Iowa...
He has to win big, though.
If you look at his campaign, his strategy in Iowa was to be everyone's second choice.
Yes.
And they knew that they were not going to be everyone's first choice, but they kept hoping that they were going to just barely hit that.
Turns out Warren was everybody's second choice.
What's the word I'm thinking of?
Viability.
They kept hoping they were going to hit viability, and they just kept not hitting viability.
It was a bit of a sad situation.
We said last time his popular vote averaged at 14.9% in the first vote, meaning he just barely did not hit viability on average.
But also, just from a more of a philosophical point of view, since when has there been a successful presidential candidate whose goal was to be everybody's second choice?
Yeah.
You have to get people fired up. And the thing is, I keep harping back to this, but it's the truth. Joe Biden doesn't have a narrative. His narrative is the same as Hillary Clinton. The difference is that he's a little bit older. He used to be vice president.
Yeah.
But it's not going to do anything for him. Trump has a narrative.
If you look at every successful presidential candidate, they always have even just like a one-word narrative. So like Trump, when you think Trump, you think the wall, you think all his like very specific policy proposals that he ran on. When you think Obama, you think hope, you think, a new age, all that stuff. You think
Obamacare.
Yeah, and you think, Clinton, there's a third way, Reagan revolution, all that stuff.
I like how we're just leaving out the Bushes.
I mean, Bush 2 ran on economics. And
Bush 1 ran on Reagan. Bush 2 ran on, I don't know what he ran on the first time.
So we were both 1 year old at inauguration, 1 year old at inauguration. So we don't remember that race very well, but from what I can tell, it seemed like a much more election of ideas versus election of more of an election on policies. Because Gore is a very intellectual person. Bush is also a very smart person. His public speaking doesn't always show that, but he is. But he ran on an economic policy before 9/11. Gore was running on economic policy also, and environmental policy. But
Bush 2, the second time wartime president, was going to be reelected.
There was
John Kerry.
About that. But that's important. That's it's interesting that every single presidential candidate that has been like successful and kind of iconic within their party has had a message, and Biden does not have a message. Bernie has a message. Pete has a message. Biden does not have a message.
Biden's message, as far as, what's the closest thing that he has to a message that isn't "I'm not Trump and I was Obama's vice president"?
I mean, let's go to his website to find out. But
he is his message is, I'm going to protect the Affordable Care Act. I'm going to protect and safeguard and improve Obamacare in a way that we were not able to do for the last 2 years. Well, I guess the last 4 years. Obama in his second term never had a supermajority, right? Or not a supermajority. He never had.
No. So if you look
I didn't think so.
at Biden's website, and after you pass the paywall where you have to pay your money, there's just a big text, "Our best days still lie ahead." And then he says, "Joe's vision. We are in a battle for the soul of America. It's time to remember who we are. We're Americans, tough and resilient. We choose, we choose hope over fear, science over fiction, all that stuff. Amtrak today, work every day. It's just a very like generic pro-American campaign, and genericness never gets you far in a presidential election.
No.
Ask John Delaney. Speaking of, actually, we have lost.
Which brings us to a rather unfortunate segment every week, where we take time to remember the fallen candidates. Last week's segment was ridiculously long.
We had to catch up on all the candidates that had dropped out, which were 17 up until then. We have three dropouts this week, bringing the total to 20 total dropouts. Also, we have no more people of color running for president, meaning save a constitutional or a contested convention that ends up with a crazy candidate. We're going to have a white candidate. So, with that said,
Andrew Yang,
Michael Bennett,
Deval Patrick.
So not only is this mourning the loss of probably one of the most interesting presidential candidates we've had since Ross Perot.
Oh my God, yes.
And then also Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, which we'll get to in a second, but also Michael Bennett, who is white toast with sour cream on top. And then Deval Patrick, who...
Hey, don't talk like that. He wanted you to be his student representative on campus.
Yeah, and then we had Deval Patrick, who, let's say if this episode goes viral and we get 1,000 listeners, probably 2 of them will have heard of before this election. He was the governor of Massachusetts, and he was, I think...
Deval Patrick was actually a pretty good governor of Massachusetts, but he just does not have a national profile, and he joined the race so late.
He was a very good
he joined the race
governor.
With Bloomberg.
He, sandwiched Mitt Romney and Charlie Baker, so he was that for whatever reason, the token Democratic governor in Massachusetts in the past few years.
Yeah, but he also worked for Bain Capital, so it was almost as if like Massachusetts, like they put out like a LinkedIn request for a governor, and they were like previously successful candidates have worked at Bain Capital, and Deval Patrick was like, oh, that's me.
Yeah, but I mean, he worked with the NAACP, the DOJ on racial profiling. He worked with helped increase the sales tax there to help fund Massachusetts Department of Transportation. He raised the minimum wage. He did a lot for the state.
He solidified Obama/Romney care.
Yeah, so what he did as governor of Massachusetts was really big, but
Absolutely.
It just did not translate, especially this late on in the election, especially where he does not have any big name recognition.
So that's Deval Patrick.
So that's Deval Patrick. Michael Bennett, I already described. And then Andrew
Yang. Oh, my goodness. It made sense that he was going to drop out after such a poor showing in New Hampshire.
He was really hoping
he had my goodness. I will say this. When 2 CNN anchors, who I respect a lot, Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, devoted a solid 5 minutes, and I mean like no commercials, just an actual solid 5 minutes of just the back and forth between the two of them, basically saying maybe not how good of a candidate Andrew Yang was, but the fact that Andrew Yang running had done like a legitimate public service to the country.
Yeah. And
Jake Tapper and Dana Bash are like incredibly neutral in their coverage, just in my opinion. They talked about UBI, they talked about the new kind of excitement that that he was bringing to the campaign. They compared him to Barack Obama. The fact that one of Andrew Yang's kids has, I believe, Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Or no, not Down syndrome. It's on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, it's on the spectrum.
And he was very public about that and made that part of his campaign.
Mm-hmm.
He was, in my opinion, as far as policies go, a complete candidate. Not only that, he had, maybe you might not have agreed with some of his policies, but he had a comprehensive set of policies. We're talking very accessible, but also incredibly intellectual, that spoke both to people who wouldn't consider themselves very educated, but also people who would consider themselves educated. I mean, for a time, before I was more informed on the differences in how the candidates were presenting themselves, he took me away from Warren.
So The interesting thing with Yang is that he had hundreds of policies on his website. If it's still up, check it out because he has a lot of interesting policies.
I hope that website is still up because he should just keep it up as a service to the country.
But the most interesting thing that he proposed, and all of you know him as this person, he's the UBI guy.
Universal Basic Income, to quote a certain YouTube channel, one of the most ambitious social policies of our time. And unfortunately, fortunately, that is not hyperbole.
So when it first was announced, it had a lot of, it was very mixed, but not just partisan. So there were a lot of Republicans that are like, yes, finally someone's talking about this. There were a lot of Democrats that are like, yes, finally someone talks about this. And then there were a lot of also like, no, this is a horrible idea for completely different reasons. So the typical Republican approach to UBI is cut social programs and replace it with UBI. Whereas the typical Democratic plan is just add UBI on top of Social Security programs, so long as Yang's program was everyone gets $1,000 a month, so long as your social benefits don't already exceed $1,000 a month. Everyone gets $1,000 a month, and so that got a lot of debate. I know Bernie pretty much outright said, "I don't want that." AOC warned against it. In one of her town halls, she spoke against the Republican plan of UBI. Of cutting social programs
because there's two versions of UBI and we can talk about this because now this is why I personally love it because as somebody who I try to avoid partisan debates at all costs. This is something that appeals to everybody. So number one, you can have it. This is the Republican version as a replacement to welfare, and not only is it a replacement, it would be very successful because you could take away all the stupid strings that come attached with welfare.
Yeah, it's giving everyone complete freedom over their spending for their for their needs that they appeal to the government for.
And you can cut welfare. You can get rid of the welfare state and then just give people their money. So it basically provides a floor, a standard of living for everybody equally. Which it's like a flat. I don't want to call it a flat tax, but it's a lump sum payment that helps protect you from abject or absolute poverty, which I feel like is an idea we could all get behind. The version that the AOC wing of the Democratic Party has the potential to get behind, they haven't come out and said it, I think, is UBI in addition to welfare.
So what's interesting is AOC responded to Yang's tweet and said, quote, "You ran a great race, Andrew Yang. Your campaign focused on the future and looked like you were having a lot of fun doing it. Thank you for bringing up ideas like UBI and opening a discourse on how we better value undervalued work like caregiving."
Absolutely.
So, AOC just admitted right there that she's willing to at least talk about UBI, which is something big. That's not something many candidates outside of Andrew Yang have ever been willing to talk about.
I don't think it's something that many candidates even heard of because if a caller comes through saying, "Hey, Governor Hickenlooper," or "Hey, Bob Casey, can you maybe introduce a bill on UBI?" That call never gets through because the staffer hasn't heard of it or they just get put. I mean, it's something that nobody even knows about, or if they do know about it, it's not something that any representative is going to give time to. That will change, and let me explain why. The email that Andrew Yang sent out to his supporters when he announced that he was suspending his campaign, let me just read some of the stats that he gave us because he is, the math guy. He writes to us, "We stood on the debate stage and shifted our national conversation to include the fourth industrial revolution, a topic nobody wanted to touch. Robotization is a problem. Andrew Yang brought it to the forefront."
And that was something that I need to mention real quick that he brought that up in a debate, and I think it was Warren that said, "Oh, I don't think robotization is the major loss of jobs," and I think she got booed.
The Yang Gang was out in force that night.
It wasn't even the Yang Gang. That's one thing that when Yang was talking about, once he says it, everyone gets it. It's like, oh no, these people are taking our jobs, or our jobs are being offshored, et cetera, et cetera. If you say, most jobs are being automated, people are like, oh, that makes sense. And especially for most people that don't work in more complex services, your jobs can also be automated away pretty easily.
Even intermediate white-collar jobs, 90% of jobs in the legal industry are up for robotization in the next 10 to 15 years. But to just continue with the email. So he continues on writing, "Our signature proposal, universal basic income, has become part of the mainstream conversation. Fact. We increased the popular support for universal basic income from 66% of Democrats and 72% among voters aged 18 to 34.
So
that's up from in probably like the 20s
10,
and 10s.
20s is a pretty reaching estimate there to begin
Hell,
with.
before Andrew Yang, I mean, I had heard of UBI, but it was one of those policies that you put in your back pocket, and you're like, in a perfect world, this would be what we do.
Like, as an economist, this would be a fun idea.
Imagine, and I mean, me just speaking as an economist, I feel like there are other economics majors out there who you read about this policy and it's like, man, wouldn't it be great if we could just do this? But it's like, no, stuff gets in the way because government, because politics, blah, 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 right? Andrew Yang took one of those dream policies and then actually brought it to a stage and got applause for it consistently and proved that he could establish a diverse bipartisan coalition to support those ideas. He was bringing Trump supporters into the fold.
Yes, he had one of the highest conservative support among voters. So the question is, does UBI die with Andrew Yang? I think it loses it loses its spokesperson, but I don't think it's dead.
No,
especially if you consider the
not.
Support among people our age and slightly older than us. It's definitely not.
We have to. It is quite literally our responsibility, and anybody listening to this who is younger, it is our responsibility to remember Andrew Yang, remember what he brought to the table, and remember why he was great, despite the fact that he was only polling at 3%
the entire time. And then with our final 10 minutes, let's just talk about our predictions moving forward. Who do you think is going to win Nevada? Who do you think is going to win South Carolina? And our way, way, way too early prediction, who do you think is going to win the nomination?
Oh, God.
So, Alex, you're up first.
You're going to put me up first? I pass. Just kidding. Okay. So my prediction for South Carolina, Biden. My prediction for second place, oh God, Steyer was polling so well. I'll just say Steyer because I think that the margin is too difficult to surpass. I think that
Nevada,
Latinos. Isn't that the big block in that?
Yeah, it is.
I will say a prominent Nevada union just this evening declined to endorse Biden, so that's not great.
No.
Furthermore, all right, as far as winning Nevada, I will say Bernie.
I'm going to actually go on a limb and say Bernie for both.
Bernie winning outright South Carolina. You are insane.
In the lieu of any other polls, I cannot say that Biden has not dropped in South Carolina.
Biden was at 31 points.
I think a lot of the reason that...
A 12-point lead.
I think a large reason that African-American people liked Joe Biden is because they thought white people liked Joe Biden.
To quote Van Jones.
And obviously, they don't that much.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I obviously, and we're going to be talking about this in the next week or so, black people don't all vote the same. But
imagine
those who
diversity among the black community,
those who read their news and think critically, which is most of them,
yes.
As all Americans, I should clarify to avoid that soundbite.
Wow.
As most people, African Americans crazily have their own point of view on issues, and a lot of them probably will see that Biden's not as strong as a candidate as they might have imagined. Yeah. So I think, 2 weeks now, 3 weeks now away, we have a while for Biden to make plenty more mistakes that make him drop
absolutely
even lower.
And plenty of time for Michael Bloomberg to run YouTube ads showing them. Although he hasn't really been doing that. Bloomberg's been playing kind of nice, I think.
He's been playing nice to Biden, not necessarily to Bernie.
Yeah, that's true. So you're saying that...
The other question is who will win nationally? Do you think we go do you think we have a decisive winner going into the convention?
I do.
Who do you think it's going to be?
Don't lock me in for this.
We'll be doing this most weeks.
Based on the fact that I think that Bernie is going to win Nevada, I think that Pete has a lot of money, and I think that Biden is going to win South Carolina, and everyone's going to forget about it. I think Pete wins the convention.
I think it goes in. I think Bernie goes into the convention.
I think Pete wins uncontested. Right
wow, now. No. I think Bernie goes in.
I don't think it's going to be contested, though.
I think it is. I'm almost positive it's going to be a contested convention with especially if we still have 9 candidates moving forward, or even if Tulsi Gabbard drops and we still have 8 candidates who are still.
Give us 1 second. We're coming into some static here.
All right, we're going to do this one more time. All right, sorry. So as we were saying, we're giving our predictions for who's going to win in 2016. This
If
is
you're just
WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio. I am Eddie Zakreski. My counterpart is Alex Wolf.
So, as I just said earlier, I think this might have staticked out. I'm predicting Biden to win South Carolina, and I predict that nobody will care. I predict Bernie will win Nevada in a very close race, probably with Biden and maybe one of the billionaires. And then I predict, because I don't believe there will be a contested convention, I predict Pete will win.
So my prediction is very different. I think that Bernie's going to win in Nevada and South Carolina. I think Biden's going to continue to drop. Bernie's going to win both. And then I think we are going to be going into a contested convention. Bernie's going to have a slight lead, and I think he walks away with the nomination.
How does Bernie win both and then go into a contested convention?
Because Bernie's support is a very weird group where it's not white people, it's not college-educated whites, it's not non-college educated white people. It's just this very odd, like, sporadic group of people that I don't know if it's going to be able to coalesce into the over almost 2,000 delegates you need.
Sure. Okay.
Because also, remember, Bernie has 21 delegates. Pete has 22 delegates. Pete being the front runner right now means basically nothing. Statistically, completely insignificant, these first two.
Yeah.
Politically significant, but statistically completely irrelevant. So the other question, and again, far too early for this, who's going to be the vice president?
Oh, God. Look, well, it's going to be either a woman or a person of color. We know that much.
Especially because, well, it could not be a woman if a woman gets the nomination, but it's...
if a woman wins the nomination, it's going to be a person of color.
Probably.
Dream Vice President Andrew Yang. No, I actually think because of his like big policy focus and the fact that he's a humanity first and all that. Seriously though, I mean Joe Biden's really the only vice president I've ever known that isn't Mike Pence. He gives off that kind of vice presidential big idea, trying to get a certain. The only thing that Andrew Yang doesn't do is the most important thing a vice president does, which is basically guarantee a state for whoever is running with them.
That's the thing. In an election as close as this, I think that the Democrats' first focus, outside of having a candidate that will help you be a better candidate, is have a candidate that will help you win a state. That's why Hillary Clinton picked Tim Kaine back in 2016, although that was not a good idea because Tim Kaine's not the best candidate, and Mark Warner would have been so much better, or like Terry McAuliffe or anyone. But that said, I think that it's likely that you're going to see someone from Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania. I don't think it's going to be any of the senators, though, and I hope it's not any senator that becomes the vice president, because right now the Senate...
Maybe governors?
Possibly a governor or former governor.
Hickenlooper?
I don't think the Democrats need Hickenlooper, though.
I don't think so either.
I think the Democrats would benefit more with Hickenlooper in the Senate and Cory Gardner out of the Senate.
Yeah, that's fair. How about DeWalt Patrick?
Again, like that's definitely a possibility. He wouldn't be a bad vice presidential candidate.
No, not at all.
Especially if he was running alongside maybe a Pete person.
He comes from Massachusetts.
But
I say DeWalt Patrick because man of color.
Yeah. Massachusetts presidential candidates have not done well since one of them got shot. Since the one after him also got shot.
Oh,
and after that, they have not won. So
maybe let's avoid Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I know she has repeatedly said that she's not looking for it, but I mean, Stacey Abrams comes to mind.
Yeah, and she would do a good job of mobilizing a lot of African American progressives, even if there was a moderate candidate. So again, like a Klobuchar ticket with Stacey Abrams or a Pete ticket with Stacey Abrams.
I will say a Pete ticket with Stacey Abrams feels fake as hell.
It feels very artificial. If Pete nominated Stacey Abrams, it would feel like he's just being like, "Hey guys, I can get the African American support. Trust me, I'll get this very popular."
I think that it would kind of break Stacey Abrams' brand a little bit, and we really don't want to do that. She's such an incredibly strong figure.
It would be the same as if Pete went on Oprah. I feel.
Oh boy,
like it's the same. Just like I'm doing this for the votes feeling versus I'm doing this because I think this person would be a good vice president. I feel like a Bernie Abrams ticket would also be very good.
Oh, a Bernie Stacey Abrams ticket would be amazing. That I could actually see.
So one other interesting thing is that you could see a presidential candidate that didn't win the convention becoming a vice president. So In 2008, Joe Biden ran, dropped out, and then he became Obama's vice president, obviously. Same thing happened with George H.W. Bush in 1980. So it's definitely not out of the realm of possibilities. Also, I really like the idea of a Pete Amy ticket in either order, especially because Buttigieg Klobuchar is so much fun to say. Buttigieg Klobuchar. Just say it to yourself. It's so fun. Or Pete Amy, as I would say on the ticket.
Yeah, there you go.
Buttigieg Klobuchar. It's fun. Or Klobuchar Buttigieg. It's either way.
Maybe we do a quick little news dump because there's a lot of stuff that happened this week that's worth just mentioning on the air.
Just mentioning really quickly before we wrap it all
Number
up.
one, as I alluded to earlier, the new budget proposal, $4 trillion in cuts. It's a $4.8 trillion budget, I believe. $4 trillion in cuts to mostly Medicaid, other welfare programs, 20% cut to the State Department, 20% cut to transportation, 10% or 15% to the EPA. Traditional things on the conservative bucket list. Very aspirational. Active fighting has resumed again in Syria.
It has.
To the chagrin of Tulsi Gabbard, who is still in the race, by the way.
Tulsi Gabbard is still in the race despite polling at, I think, 2%? Maybe.
Didn't Tulsi Gabbard get called up?
Tulsi Gabbard is at 1.6%. Yeah, she is. I think she's in something right now.
She's been deployed somewhere, which that's actually kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think that's like the first time that's ever happened, and I really like that it has.
But, fun fact, even though Tom Steyer is polling really high in South Carolina, he's only polling 0.2 points higher than Tulsi Gabbard nationally at 1.8%.
That's why it's insane that he's doing so well in South Carolina.
Yeah, it's confusing, definitely.
Anyway, what else has happened? Roger Stone happened, and by Roger Stone, President Trump, via Twitter and I think other communications, seems to have attempted to influence DOJ officials regarding the sentencing hearing of his longtime confidant, Roger Stone.
Yes. So that's another controversy going on. Bill Barr is not a fan of what's going on with the Roger Stone incident.
Here's a direct quote that came out from Bill Barr literally a few hours ago per CBS or an ABC interview. Trump tweeting prohibits me from doing my job.
Yeah.
That's what the Attorney General said tonight.
So, furthermore, T-Mobile and Sprint have been trying to...
Oh, that's right.
Have been trying to merge for years. They finally got the approval to.
Finally.
And then coronavirus is still going crazy in China.
They have a new way of identifying it now, and that caused the count globally to go up to 60,000 people.
Yeah, and also 2 top CCP officials were fired.
Oh, that's right.
And then, speaking of firing, the Iowa Democratic Party's chairman also is stepping down. Other than that, I think that's about all of our news for the week. The time is now 7:59, so we're going to start wrapping up everything this week. Our intro and our outro music is by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda and is produced by Elise Duda. Our signal monitors are James Walsh and Nick Delisio.
You can find a recording of this podcast on our YouTube channel, Catch52. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to stay updated on air times, episode topics, and upcoming guests.
We are always welcome to hear your comments, feedback, and suggestions on our episodes. It is now 7:59, and stay with us on WDSR for some more music. Have a good Friday and a great weekend.